Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome back to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast Summer Shorts series. This is the last episode of that series, and it is very fitting that the last episode of our Summer Shorts would be with the guest I started this entire podcast with, Mr. Daniel Mays of Frith Farm in Scarborough, Maine. I got Daniel on to talk about interplanting strategies, and we do that. We talk about some of the things that have worked and have not worked. We also talk about making mycorrhizal associations with your interplants and planting sweet alyssum below tomatoes, and we also veer off a little bit and talk about killing cover crops with the flail mower, but we do cover a lot of ground on the cover cropping front, no pun intended. I always have a blast chatting with Daniel, and there is some great insight in this conversation. Also, Daniel wrote a new book that I am very excited about. It is exactly the book I wish I'd had when starting a farm. It covers all the basics of starting and running a vegetable operation, but through an ecological and human scale lens. It's called the No-Till Organic Vegetable Farm, How to Start and Run a Profitable Market Garden That Builds Health in Soil, Crops, and Communities. It is on pre-order now. We'll put a link in the show notes. But first, thank you to everyone who supports the show however you can. Our main means of funding is not advertising. It's you, the patrons, and we greatly appreciate that. If you want to support this work, you can check it out at notillgrowers.com/farmerjesse, or kick us a few bucks to @notillgrowers on Venmo. But if you go the Patreon route at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Scott Snodgrass, Jody Miller, Shane and Emma of Aslan Organics, Travis and Heidi of Arcadia Acres, Kevin Keene, Ryan Gosser, Jean-Martin Fortier, Yannick LaPlante, and Meredith Light. Let me know, Meredith. Big thanks to everyone who supports the show, even if it's just sharing it through your various social media accounts. We appreciate that. You can always kick us a few bucks over at Venmo to @notillgrowers, or like I said, sign up to be a patron at patreon.com/farmerjesse. All right, enough from me. Let's get into this amazing conversation with Daniel Mays of Frith Farm in Scarborough, Maine. Daniel Mays, thank you so much for taking the time. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I've been reading through an advance copy of your book, The No-Till Organic Vegetable Farm, and it's an extremely good resource. I'm super excited about it. In one section I have really enjoyed is the stuff on multi-cropping, or what I generally refer to, I guess, as interplanting. So I'm hoping we can just start with this season and talk about what are some of the interplantings you have going on right now, or you've had going on this year.
Sure, absolutely. I guess I should preface it by saying it's always been experimental. So just because something works, here one season doesn't necessarily mean everyone should go out and replicate it. So I want to sort of have that disclaimer. But yeah, what's worked for us and what we're doing again this year. One example would be endive and escarole and radicchio, sort of the chicories in between the peppers, because pepper plants take a long time to get established and kind of fill out. And that timing works out pretty well to get a crop of, just a single row of endive or escarole or radicchio out between those pepper plants before their canopy closes. So that's one example. Another example would be these are the sort of tried and true ones for us, where the timing is a little more, time and space are a little more resilient, not so fine-tuned. So we'll do spinach on the shoulders of our pea beds, sugar snap peas. That timing works out pretty well. The spinach is bolted and ready to come out by the time the peas are ready to come out. And another one I love is carrots and ginger together in the high tunnel. So it's like you're growing a nice soup right in one bed. But so the carrots take a while or the ginger takes a long time to come up. We direct seed our ginger. We don't pre-sprout it. And meanwhile, the carrot crop can be, well on its way to maturity. When the ginger does come up, it shoots up pretty tall, so it pops right out of that carrot cover. And then we harvest the carrots, and the ginger stays the rest of the season in the high tunnel, filling out that bed.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so let's go through some of these examples because I kind of want to get kind of tease out how you sort of go about choosing these and planting these and what kind of considerations go into each by using these examples. So let's get back to the chicories and peppers.
Hmm.
How do you time those, and can you kind of give us the details on what the sort of spacing is and how that works?
Surely, yeah, yeah. So basically, it came about by basically I was saving, so many beds for peppers, and they just sat empty for most of the spring because up here in Maine we have to wait until the end of May or early June to plant Solanaceae crops outside. So all of April and May, basically, those beds would just sit empty, waiting for the peppers to go in because it's not quite enough time to get a spring cover crop in. So rather than have them just sit empty, I figured I'd plant that a single row right down the middle of endive and escarole, and we plant those as soon as possible in the spring, as soon as the ground thaws, pretty much. So those are growing and well on their way to being ready to harvest by the time the peppers go in. And then it's usually, I guess it's probably about 3 to 4 weeks later after the peppers have gone in that those endives are ready to come out. And that's usually just as the peppers are starting to, shade them out and close their canopy.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like Solanaceae in particular is kind of the ultimate in opportunity for interplanting just because they're so slow to grow and they don't canopy out for several weeks. I mean, enough time to get a round of radishes through or something like that. Are you doing more with tomatoes as well?
Yes, yep, yeah, I would totally agree with you. Basically, it's those slow growing, widely spaced crops, which Solanaceae, I'm not sure how you say that, but but yeah,
Oh
that
yeah, I don't either really. Hey, you all, I just want to jump in here and say that Daniel is correct. The pronunciation, says the internet, is indeed Solanaceae. Yep, back to Daniel.
tomatoes, peppers, eggplants are greatly suited for that. So yeah, we definitely plant the shoulders of tomato beds before the tomatoes even go in. So we'll plant those to carrots in the early spring as soon as the ground is plantable, and then the carrots are up and maybe 6 inches tall by the time the tomatoes go in down the middle. And we actually also uh, alternate tomato with sweet alyssum transplants so that those kind of fill out under and in between the tomatoes and carrots.
Yeah, that's a cool one. That's one we've been doing this year too. So for people that don't know, Sweet Elysium is like it's a little small, kind of very short to the ground flowering brassica. That's really pretty. Is there a reason that you've chosen that one for underneath the tomatoes?
Totally, yeah. A couple of reasons. One is, like you said, it's really low growing. It has a very sort of small root system, so it really doesn't compete with crops, I find. And also, it's a great attractor of beneficial insects, especially small ones such as the braconid wasp, which is the wasp that parasitizes tomato hornworms. So that sort of is a satisfying package deal with the with the tomatoes, sort of thinking that we might be attracting those parasitic wasps as well.
Yeah, that's great. Can we talk a little bit about that spinach and sugar snap
Of
pea
course.
combo? So can you just kind of take us back and talk about how that one works from sort of start to bolting?
Totally. So when we plant our peas, I pre-sprout those indoors, and then we plant them out with a little half-inch sprout on them to get around the soil temperature being a little cold. So we get them in real early, and then we'll direct seed the spinach, at the same time on the shoulders of the bed, because with peas we just do two rows right next to each other down the middle so that they can find the trellis easily. We use a Hortanova plastic mesh trellis hanging from EMT conduit, metal conduit poles held up by 6-foot T posts. Um, so anyway, the trellis is maybe not related to the interplanting, but that's why the peas are sort of hugging the middle of the bed, and that leaves the shoulders wide open. And spinach is just a good one because it does well in our spring We can sell it easily, and then it's ready to come out. It's done. It's bolted by the time the peas are slowing down. Mid-July.
No, I like that trellis tidbit because when we do peas, we often just have the net, but then we kind of just really try and pull a string taut across the top, and it just never really works that well. So when you're putting up that trellis, you have it tied to that top bar.
Yes, exactly. So we yeah, I first tried just using a wire, using a string, and it just always sags and kind of makes a mess. So I evolved to using these metal conduit poles. We use 3/4 inch metal conduit, and we weave that through the top squares of that Hortonova mesh. So the mesh is hanging from the conduit at every section, and that keeps it just really straight. There's no sagging at all, and the peas can climb the full 6 feet height. So it just makes harvesting much easier than when they're all jumbled and tangled.
Are your beds laid out east to west or it's north to south? And the only reason I ask is because ours are laid out sort of east to west. Um, and so we've been kind of doing a similar combination with the peas and the spinach, but we've been doing our peas on the north side of the bed, um, kind of allowing for that sunlight on the south side for the spinach. Does that make sense? Like, have you noticed any difference or does it matter given your bed layout?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, my beds are mostly roughly east-west. They're a little bit, not perfectly, but roughly east-west. And I guess I'm doing some mental gymnastics with the geometry of the sun in my head, but I feel like our our latitude being so far north, like the sun actually rises and sets in the northeast and northwest for us in the summer. So I'm just wondering if there's a difference there in latitude, that would, because yeah, I haven't really noticed one side of the bed being much more shaded than the other, except in the spring. Certainly the south side of the bed warms faster. But by now in the summer with the sun so high overhead, I feel like it's less of an issue.
Right. I guess I'm thinking more in the spring because after June, it's really tough for us to grow spinach.
Right.
So maybe that's the big difference is that when we're doing it, it really is still in the
Right.
south.
Earlier in the
Um,
season. Right. Yeah, but no, we just do the peas right in the middle, and we do spinach on both sides. And I'd say I haven't noticed them growing unevenly. I feel like they both grow about the same rate, both sides of the bed.
right. Right. And I mean, I wonder if you could almost use that to your advantage later on into the season, like get through June with spinach. If we used a little bit of that shade from the pea trellis.
Absolutely. Yep, that's a great benefit of interplanting. You can actually, right, keep some crops a little shaded.
Something you said about the ginger carrot pairing, um, which I thought was interesting, is that you're just direct seeding your ginger. So you're getting ginger seed because we haven't talked about ginger really on the podcast, so it'd be kind of interesting to explore it a little
Hmm.
bit. Um, you're getting your ginger seed and you're not pre-sprouting it. You're doing this in a tunnel, I assume, right? Or maybe you said that.
Yes,
Okay.
in a high tunnel. Yep.
And then you're putting those in the ground in what month would that be for you?
Yeah, we put them in like early to mid May, I'd say. Probably early May. Yeah, even late April sometimes. I try to wait till the ground's, I think, like 50 degrees or so. Um, Even though ginger obviously likes it a lot warmer, I feel like at that point it'll start sprouting anyway, even if very slowly.
And are you breaking up those pieces at all, or are you just putting in full chunks?
Mostly full chunks. Although I guess if it's really big, yeah, we will cut it. Um, but I find that in our short season, the bigger chunks really grow better and faster, because we have a pretty narrow window to get what is a tropical crop to maturity, or not even to maturity. We sell it as immature ginger, but just to get enough mass on it to be worth selling.
Yeah. Are you buying that seed in, or are you getting?
Yeah, I've always bought it in from Biker Dude, the
Wait,
Hawaii
say that one again. From who?
from Biker Dude. I guess it's called Hawaii Clean Seed now.
Oh, okay.
It's
Yeah.
the only source I know of organic seed ginger. Um, and that's where all the farmers, around here get it. But this year they had a crop failure, so I went in with another farmer, and we just he found a source at a local food co-op of just organic table ginger, and it was actually on discount because it was already starting to sprout. So that seemed perfect. So we got a bunch of that and just planted that, and it came up faster than I've ever seen it come up, and it's looking really good.
That's great. I think it's important for people to know maybe too that if you buy, so we used to get the seed ginger, and it's great. It's beautiful stuff, and it does really well. It's kind of expensive. I forget what the per pound is, generally, but we had, but for the last few years, yeah, we've gone to the co-op and bought it for $2 or $3 a pound, and it has to be organic, so it's not irradiated and degermed,
Right.
essentially. So, but yeah, we've had really good luck with that, and grows really well, and we've not had any issues.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the more economical way to go. I think it's probably upwards of 3 times the cost to buy the sort of organic seed ginger. Although there are more variety choices, and it's probably a little more reliable in terms of consistency as well. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with the co-op ginger.
That's great. So then, one of the things that you talk about in your book that I'd love to kind of just get into for a minute is this idea of um, using plants that are non-mycorrhizal with
Hmm.
interplanting plants that do make mycorrhizal connections. Can you sort of break that down for us a little bit and talk about how you have and do utilize that?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess, yeah, non-mycorrhizal plants, they're relatively few of them on Earth, but as vegetable growers, we grow a disproportionate number of those. So everything in the beet and brassica family does not form mycorrhizal connections with those beneficial soil fungi. So the flip side of that is that those soil fungi populations can really diminish if you grow a whole plot of nothing but you know something it can't connect with, because they need those living root connections to thrive. So yeah, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, all of that is not feeding the mycorrhizal fungus, and yeah, beets, chard, spinach as well. So rather, I used to just grow whole plots of those families, and not really think about it. But now I one example is I undersow the kale to parsley. That's one of my favorites, actually. And I wait until the kale till there's just enough space to push an earthway seeder through the kale, so just before those leaves close the canopy. Um, and that timing works out pretty well, that the parsley really doesn't compete with the kale, but does establish nicely over the course of the season. And I figure it's not, still the mycorrhizal fungi aren't like thriving under there because that parsley is pretty weak, but at least they're getting like a lifeline drip of solar energy through that parsley, that they'll be held in place there for the next crop that will be, mycorrhizal.
That's great. Have you ventured into using the Jang yet?
I did. I got myself a Jang, and I tried it, and I didn't like it. Call me old fashioned and stubborn, but I'm loyal to the Earthway, um, and I'll tell you why. I felt the Jang, the geometry of it was such that I couldn't push I couldn't push down on it with a lot of force to kind of push it through a lot of chaff and stubble, which we have a lot of on our farm, being no till. I found when I really pushed it to get through that stuff, it would kind of pop a wheelie because of the geometry of the handle. And I couldn't come up with a way to sort of modify that handle without, taking, rebuilding the Jang. So yeah, that in combination with like the Earthways just kind of working for us. I yeah, it was short lived. My my soiree was the Jang.
That's great. When you tried it, did you try it with a double disc
I
opener?
did. Yep. Yep. And yeah,
Okay.
sometimes I'm just like muscling through like a couple inches of leaves for a little stretch, just to like we try to rake the leaves off the bed into the paths, but sometimes there's a little bit that spills over. And with the earthway, I can just kind of muscle through that and it pushes it to the side. But with the Jang, even with a double disc opener, if I tried to do that same force through it, it would just pop a wheelie.
I love that. I love the Earthway loyalty. And I feel like, if it's work, it's like if it's not broken, why fix it? Like, you have a great system, and that Earthway is an excellent tool. There's no issue with it. Um, yeah, that's great. I like hearing those
Yeah, I
stories.
think if it ain't broke, like try the other one out, but don't you don't you don't have to switch to it. But I didn't want to be so stubborn that I didn't at least try the Jang.
That's great. I found that, let's see, we mowed some cover crop, um, some rye and vetch this spring, and I flail mowed it instead of crimping it.
Hmm.
And I was able to push that. I really liked how that Jang went through. Um, but I mean, I just used my Earthway the other day. I love that
Yeah,
tool. It's
yeah,
great.
totally. And yeah, flail mowing definitely chops things up nicely, so it's easier to get through them.
Yeah, yeah. I've found that we haven't quite got to the point when our rye, or maybe it's just when I'm needing those beds, but I haven't got to the point when our rye crimps down well enough yet. Like, we can crimp it down, but it doesn't quite kill it. When we even with the tarp, like, it works, but it's um, I've found that it's easier for us to just go through and mow it super fast, and then we can replant it within the week. Basically, flail mow it really low, let it slightly regrow, and then flail mow it again, and that basically eradicates the rye. Um,
Interesting. So you're not even solarizing or tarping at all. You just mow twice.
Mow
Yeah.
twice, yeah. So I've done all of it. Like, I've done the tarping and the solarizing, but I've found that we can mow it, and especially in our climate, like with our temperature jump in June, like we're in 95 degrees in June. Not the whole month, but we get there pretty
Hmm.
fast. Basically, I've noticed that if we mow that rye down, we get this really nice fine mulch that looks like a chopped up straw. And then we let it, whatever wants to regrow a little bit, we let it regrow a little bit, over maybe the course of a week. And then we mow it again really heavy, and then we immediately plant.
Hmm.
And we found that weakens that molt, that rye enough that even if a little bit comes back, we maybe have to pull out like a handful of plants here or there. But it does a pretty good job, and it's pretty fast. Um,
Hmm. Right.
so I don't know that would work in every climate, because the rye just doesn't want to grow in that heat. But yeah, it's been effective for us.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like that could work. And you don't have any trouble getting the. Is it just a flail mower on a BCS?
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and that doesn't bog down or anything getting through that.
no, because like I said, our rye's, even when it's dense, it's not super
Hmm.
tall. And maybe it's just where we're putting it. Like, maybe there's still some compaction issues there, and the rye's just not quite getting where it needs to get. Maybe it's just me wanting to get into those beds earlier. Um,
Totally.
but yeah, it's probably about 5 feet tall when I'm doing
Uh-huh.
it, and I do have to go at a couple different. Like, I go half the bed, and then I go the other half of the
Yep.
bed, and that puts that rye down enough that then I wait a week, some of it dries out, and then I can do it again pretty easily. Um, and our BCS is the 13 horsepower, the 749, so it's not a huge one, but it
Hmm.
runs all the implements
Hmm.
pretty well.
And so is the rye like starting to form? Like, is it blooming when you do that, or is it before it's really kind of stalked up?
No, it's blooming. It's not quite maybe to milk stage, um, but yeah, it would be blooming.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I tried. I tried to flail mow a bed this year, but the flail mower just couldn't do it on the BCS. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, so I think we'd need like a tractor mounted one, and but I try not to drive the tractors on the bed, or so far so good. I never have, so that felt like a line I didn't want to cross, and yeah, our just knocking it down and tarping it and seems to work well for the way we have it built into the crop plan, because then it leaves that thick mulch that really lasts throughout the season, even into the next season, because it's not all chopped up.
Yeah, which is one of the downsides of mowing it, is you do end up with spots that some weeds do come
Hmm.
through, and it's hard to cultivate that.
Right.
Because it's like wood chips or something. It's really hard to cultivate around wood chip. Like if you get weeds coming through wood chips or mulch, it's like really you have to hand
Right.
pull it.
Right.
And maybe I'm not putting my rye down as thick as you. I wonder.
Yeah, I definitely put it pretty thick, but I feel like the climate differences are significant too. So who knows what that's, how much of it is that?
Right, true. We've gotten quite off topic on
We
interplanting,
have.
but I don't think any I don't think anybody's gonna care. This is our podcast, Daniel. We do what we want.
Sounds good.
Last question maybe before I let you go. Do you have any interplanting interplantings that haven't worked that you feel like are relevant, or anything that you've noticed that if you do it one way it kind of has a negative effect?
Yeah, and I'd say all my failures, and I've had a handful of them, have come from just the challenges of timing and spacing. Because basically, if that first crop establishes too quickly, it'll shade out or crowd out the second crop, and then I've sort of lost that second crop. That's sort of what tends to happen. So one example would be I figured I could like get radishes in quickly and then direct seed parsnips under the radishes so that they could, they take so long to germinate that they could be germinating while the radishes were finishing sizing up. Which sounds great in theory, but I just didn't get the timing quite right. So the parsnips ended up coming up before the radishes were out, and then they got so shaded out by the radishes that they never really took off after that.
Oh,
So that was too bad because at that point it was, kind of too late to reseed the parsnips. So that was sort of a crop failure from that experiment.
right. I did that with turnips and parsnips. I sowed them at the same time, but the turnips were terrible. Like they did not do well, and the parsnips are amazing.
Huh.
I don't know
Yep.
what. I don't know what. Maybe it's the brassica thing.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting
Yeah,
one.
I do think if your soils are more fungal, then the brassicas tend to struggle a bit.
Right. One more question, if you have a second.
Of course.
The one thing that people often talk about with interplanting, or maybe have questions about, is like
Hmm.
profitability. Like you kind of talk a little bit about this in your book, but do you want to explain like multi-cropped beds, how much they earn sort of versus like monocropped beds, or like what the profitability potential is there?
Sure. Yeah, I think the potential is higher. If you took two beds and one of one crop, one of another crop versus those two beds intercropped with those two crops, I think the net productivity, the net sort of revenue from those beds is higher. The potential is higher with the intercropped combinations, just because plants, you can make better use of time and space basically with different shaped plants. The root profiles are different. They're taking up nutrients differently, so you can sort of maximize that photosynthesis and use of the bed with more diversity. The problem is the management challenges increase, and if you don't get the timing and spacing right, then you end up losing the crop. So there's kind of like risk reward. There's more risk in getting it dialed in right, but if you do get it dialed in right, I do think the profit is potentially higher. And I kind of experimented with that with lettuce and carrots last year, kind of interplanting them versus growing them separately. And when that did well, I got more profit from a bed that had those whether it was 2 rows of lettuce heads and then those come out and give more room for the 3 rows of carrots around them, versus if we just grew a bed of carrots, that would be 4 rows, which would not yield as much revenue as the combination. Sorry, that was a really wordy response. Did that make any sense?
No, I thought that was great. I mean, especially like with that sort of latter example, because yeah, if you're just taking one of those crops and growing them in a single bed, the earnings from that are not going to be as much in theory, as the ones in a well done
Hmm.
sort of intercropped bed.
Yeah, and I mean you can see that just like looking at nature as a model, like there's more photosynthesis possible the more diversity there is. Um, so the overall photosynthesis is increasing, even if each individual species is not producing as much as it would if it were by
Right.
itself.
That's great. Um, Daniel Mays, thank you so much for taking a little time for us this summer. I know it's your busy season.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, if you enjoyed that conversation, make sure to check out Daniel's book. It is so incredibly good. It's on pre-order now. Also, give Frith Farm a follow on Instagram and all the places. All the links will be in the show notes. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you're getting it. Rate and review it. Share it. All those good things. Those are all super helpful to us. We really appreciate that. We will be back with full-length podcasts in mid-October. So I've already started recording them. Very excited about that. Can't wait. Going to be an awesome season 3. Thanks to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin and my amazing partner, Hannah Crabtree. Thank you all for tuning in this summer. We'll be back shortly. All right. Bye. I like it because it's so. I like the approach of being for somebody that's starting a farm.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a big section of the book that is kind of dedicated to that. And I think of like I'm reading it and I'm like, this is what I wanted to read like 10 years ago when I was starting a farm.
That makes me very
Like
happy.
this,
That's what I want it to be. Yeah.
like it connects a lot of dots that were just missing from the agricultural literature when you and I were starting
Mm-hmm.
out, essentially, right? You started about 10 or 11 years ago,
10 years
right?
ago as well.
12 years
Yep.
ago? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean there was like so little out there about ecological farming,
Exactly. Yeah.
and you kind of had to piece it together. So no, it's great. I'm super excited to push it
Nice,
further.
man. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.